We've got to talk about this ground-shaping news out of Europe. And of course, I'm talking about Hungary, whose people just kicked King Orban off his throne after 16 years of practically unchallenged rule. And that somehow went down, even though JD Vance, he lent his glittering star power and rock-solid popularity toward campaigning in Hungary last week.
Mr. President, you are on with about 5,000 Hungarian patriots, and I think they love you even more than they love Viktor Orban.
Well, I can't believe that. I can't believe that because I love Hungary and I love that Viktor. I'll tell you, he's a fantastic man. We've had a tremendous relationship.
Man has so little charisma, he accidentally might be one of the biggest members of the resistance. But hey, even assuming that he helped rather than hurt, it still wasn't enough. And when the news broke on Sunday night that Orbán had conceded the race, the scene in Budapest, it was electric. Tens of thousands of people pouring into the streets, car horns blaring, anti-regime music filling the air. You had people dance and scream and waving flags, popping off fireworks, kissing, hugging, crying. It was just pure jubilation.
We are glad to feel some sense of hope finally.
Yes! Yes!
After
and I'm so happy and I'm glad Hungary is free now. Yay!
And, it is hard to communicate exactly what this moment felt like for so many Hungarians, because even with just how horrific Trump off it is, we still have a relatively free press and opposition party and some surviving checks and balances. In Hungary, they really haven't had those things, at least until now. So for young people there, all they've really known for most of their lives is Viktor Orban. It would be like for us if instead of Obama winning back in 2008, Trump did, and then he and the Republicans held the entire country in a vice grip until they completely got wiped out in 2024. Also, I'll say a big thing is in Hungary's case, Orbán, he didn't pull a January 6th last night. Instead, he said, yeah, I lost. With the New York Times even calling his concession speech surprisingly early and gracious, though he did promise never to give up fighting for his political vision. So now as far as, who's taken his place, let me introduce you to Péter Magyar, a 45-year-old upstart who campaigned on fixing the economy, ending corruption, and restoring democracy.
Nem kicsit, hanem nagyon.
We won not small, but big, very, very big. Together, we changed the Orbán regime. Together, we liberated Hungary. We took our homeland back.
He even echoed JFK saying, we won because Hungarians didn't ask what their homeland could do for them. They asked what they could do for their homeland. But also, I do want to be clear here. It's not like he's some liberal or progressive firebrand. He is still a conservative. In fact, he came from inside of Orbán's own Fidesz party, but he defected in 2024 and he formed a new party known as TISA, which is center-right, not far-right like Fidesz, belonging to the same group of leaders who already governed 12 of the EU's 27 nations. So, it's still an open question on exactly how much of Magyar is actually going to differ from Orbán when it comes to policy, especially on things like immigration and LGBTQ rights. But for the Hungarians who, would have preferred a more left-leaning candidate, they didn't have much of a choice but to stomach their disagreements and just vote for Magyar. Right? Because with the way that Hungary's elections work, voting for one of the other candidates, it would have been like voting for a third party here in the States for a national election. And that's to say, unfortunately, a complete waste of time. And you can actually thank Orbán himself for that because his party rewrote the constitution and election laws right after taking power in 2010. And then they gerrymandered legislative districts, purged the courts, monopolized the media, cracked down on civic organizations, and funneled state contracts to Orbán's wealthy allies. And so as a result, Fidesz won a 2/3 parliamentary majority in every election since then, even though they got as little as 44% of the vote. So that also, it gives you an idea of just the insane uphill climb that Magyar and TISA had to manage just to even have a fighting chance. But also to his credit, for the past 2 years, Magyar has campaigned incredibly hard. You had him out there touring the countryside where Fidesz drew most of its core support, visiting up to 6 towns a day at some points. This guy would give 2-hour-long speeches in backwater areas where just a few thousand people live. It was genuinely impressive. Though I'll say he was helped along the way just as much by Orbán's own failure to govern the country effectively. Right? Hungary's been ranked the most corrupt and one of the poorest countries in the EU. And so for many people, they didn't vote for Magyar as much as they voted against Orbán. But that fact, it doesn't appear to have dampened voter turnout, which clocked in at nearly 80%, which is an all-time record for Hungary's post-communist history. But still, as far as the support they needed, TISA needed roughly 5% more votes than Fidesz just to achieve a simple majority in parliament. And really, they needed a 2/3 supermajority to pass fundamental reforms and roll back the anti-democratic laws imposed by Fidesz. So even though the polls were looking good leading up to the election, people were still holding their breath on Sunday. But then, when the results came in, they fucking blew Fidesz out of the water. TISA won 138 out of 199 seats, a clear supermajority. In fact, they got more votes and more parliamentary seats than any party ever had before. And so with all that power, Magyar promised to restore the rule of law, make agencies independent again, and hold people accountable for pillaging the state's coffers. offers. And that's in addition to creating new ministries focused on acute problems in areas like public health, environmental protection, and education. But with all that said, it's also not going to be just so easy to uproot the whole regime overnight. Right? Orbán installed loyalists in key institutions from the media authority to the public prosecutor's office and the constitutional court, and many of those appointments, they're locked in place for years. But also, if Magyar wants to unlock the billions of euros in subsidies that the EU has withheld over corruption concerns, he's going to have to pass certain reforms by August of this year. Though either way, he's promised to bring Hungary back into the European community. I mean, his supporters even chanted Europe at his victory speech. And so with all this, you had presidents, prime ministers, and other officials across the continent both congratulating Magyar and celebrating the win for themselves. Because also a huge thing here is that Orbán, he vetoed a lot of EU resolutions, including sanctions on Russia and aid to Ukraine. And for years, he relentlessly stoked anti-EU and anti-Ukraine sentiment on radio, television, and social media. There were even publicly funded billboards with AI-generated images of the Ukrainian president flanked by European officials holding out his hand as if demanding money. And most recently, Orbán accused Ukraine of deliberately holding back Russian oil deliveries through a key pipeline, which Ukraine denies, saying that it was damaged by a Russian drone strike. And then also, leading up to this election, the fear-mongering got more and more intense, with Orbán deploying soldiers to defend Hungarian energy infrastructure from an imaginary Ukrainian attack. I mean, he even accused Ukrainians of plotting physical attacks on his family. And as absurd as this may sound, he claimed that Magyar's TISA party was cooked up by European conspirators in Brussels to topple his government, install a puppet regime, bankrupt the country, and forcibly conscript Hungarians into the war. And if you're hearing all that and you're like, wow, that sounds exactly like Russian propaganda, yes. And in fact, you have the Washington Post reporting that a Russian embassy official regularly holds meetings with pro-government Hungarian journalists to give them tasks and instructions. Or with the outlet also reporting that during breaks at EU meetings, Hungary's foreign minister would routinely call Russia's foreign minister and update him on discussions of potential solutions. But then also here's the real kicker. Russian intelligence agents had reportedly proposed staging an assassination attempt on Orbán as a way to shore up his support going into the election. With a secret intelligence report reportedly reading, such an incident will shift the perception of the campaign out of the rational realm of socioeconomic questions into an emotional one, where the key themes will become state security and the stability and defense of the political system. If you're unfamiliar with this guy, you're probably just beginning to see why, so many people called Viktor Orban Putin's most valuable asset in Europe. But really, he was also more than that. He was a global icon for the far-right nationalist movement across the Atlantic, even here in the United States. Orban, he's hung out at Mar-a-Lago and the White House. He's spoken at CPAC. MAGA folks often tout Hungary as a model for America. And of course, you had the Trump administration throwing its weight behind him as well.
He has my complete and total endorsement, as a matter of fact.
But now with this historic upset in Hungary and Democrats routinely trouncing Republicans in special elections over the past several months, you have many predicting that the US midterms this November, they're going to be a bloodbath. But there, I would remind Democrats and independents, or just anyone that's not pro-Trump and pro-MAGA, to remember that none of it matters if you don't vote. And in fact, that's part of the lesson we see in this Hungary story.